Hello, dear colleagues and guests. Let us start the meeting of our dissertation council for the defense of thesis by Salnitska Alekseevna for the degree of candidate of biological sciences, specialization 030204 zoology, on the theme Rove-beetles of the Quedius, staphylinidae of Russia and Middle Asia, taxonomy, distribution, and ecology. According to the order of St. Petersburg University, dated October 31, 2019, me, Luktana Vladimir Alexandrovich, Doctor of Biological Sciences, Professor of the Department of Entomology of St. Petersburg University, was appointed Chairman of the Dissertation Council. Let me introduce my fellow council members. Granovich Andrei Igorovich, Doctor of Biological Sciences, Associate Professor, Head of the Department of Zoology of Invertebrates of St. Petersburg University, Kataev. Boris Mikhailovich, Doctor of Biological Sciences, Senior Researcher at the Museum of Zoological Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Koretyaev, Boris Alexandrovich, Doctor of Biological Sciences, Senior Researcher in Systematics Laboratory, Zoological Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences. In the remote mode we have Stylianos Hatzimanoulis, PhD, University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, USA. And first, let me emphasize that according to the federal law on science and the state scientific and technical policies, St. Petersburg University has the right to award academic degrees independently. The order number 6821/1 dated the 1st of September 2016, on the basis of which we are holding this session of the Council. In accordance with this order, the session of the Dissertation Council is duly constituted if at least 2/3 of its members are present. Our Dissertation Council consists of 5 members. All members are present, including 1 member of the Council in the remote interactive mode. Thus, we have a quorum, and we may start our session. First, let me suggest the following procedure of today's session, with a total duration of no more than 2 hours. First, a chairman's summary report on the main contents of the documents submitted by the candidate and answers to possible questions, if any. Second, brief presentation by the applicant outlining the key points of her research, 15 minutes, no more. Third, questions of the applicant strictly on her report, no more than 5 minutes per question, including answers of the applicant. Fourth items will be speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council with their reviews and feedback. I suggest the following procedure. I shall first give the floor to Andrei Viktorovich Kolonovich and to Dr. Kataev, then Stylianos Hatzimanoulis is with us in remote interactive mode, and Dr. Koretyaev. And after that, the chairman shall give his feedback and answers of the applicant questions and remarks of the Dissertation Council, no more than 15 minutes. Yet I understand we have many comments, so answers will probably also take a long time. Item 7 is the open discussion. All the attendees may speak with a summary of their opinions and strictly on the topic of the study. And it's also important that all speakers are kindly requested to register and introduce themselves in full before speaking. Item 8, final answers of the applicant took no more than 5 minutes. And speech of the academic advisors, we have 2, and that will be followed by a 5-minute discussion before the open voting procedure on awarding or not awarding the degree to the candidate. And for the time of this discussion of the council members, the broadcasting shall be suspended. That will be followed by item 11, the open individual voting. The chairman of the council shall count the votes, and the results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. And finally, item 12 is the decision on awarding or not awarding the academic degree to the applicant. That will be followed by the closing remarks of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. And before we start the official procedure, let me remind you to switch off your mobile phones. Thank you. And let me also inform you that our meeting shall be recorded and broadcast online at the St. Petersburg University website. And all the speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian to English or from English into Russian. So, our meeting, let's start with item 1, the chairman's summary report. Thesis by Salnitska Alekseevna, Rove-beetles of the genus Quedius, so I will not repeat it, was accepted for defense by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University from the 31st of October 2019. The Dissertation Council was appointed by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University and also on the 31st of October. I have already introduced its members to you, dear colleagues and guests. The applicant submitted the following documents to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University: application to the Rector of St. Petersburg University to accept the thesis for consideration and defense. Second, there's a list of publications for publications describe the main scientific results, all 4 publications in journals indexed in the scientometric databases, Web of Science and Scopus. There's also a certificate of passing the candidate examination. The applicant passed 3 exams: biological sciences, foreign language, English good, and entomology good. There's also a postgraduate diploma issued on the 3rd of July 2015, certifying that the applicant was awarded the master's degree in biology. And then the thesis itself in Russian and English on paper, on the rights of the manuscript, and in the electronic form. It has been formatted in accordance with the requirements of the state standard. It should be noted that all the documents comply with Clause 12, Section 3 of Thesis, Presentation and Defense. Procedure of awarding the academic degrees in Petersburg University, Annex 1 to the order. So all the necessary documents have been submitted, so we may proceed to the next item of our procedure, and I would like to give the floor to the applicant for her report. It should take no more than 15 minutes. Dear Chairman of the Dissertation Council, dear members of the Dissertation Council, dear attendees, please allow me to present to you a report on the topic of my PhD thesis, Quedius of Russia and Central Asia, Taxonomy, Distribution and Ecology. The Quedius genus was described in the beginning of the 19th century, and due to a number of reasons, it gradually turned into a huge prefabricated taxon with an unstable system of subgenera. This situation existed until the beginning of the 21st century, until the first studies aimed at reviewing the systematics of this group were published. Based on a series of such studies, it has been shown that the group is exceptionally galactic in contrast to the previously with about 700 species of subgenera. Moreover, Brunke and his co-authors have shown that even in this group, the genus is not monophyletic and needs to be revised. The latter also confirms the fact that the genus has no synapomorphism and uses a combination of unique features on the slide to diagnose its representatives. Shown in this slide. Nevertheless, a better understanding of phylogeny of this group and the construction of new systematics significantly hampered by the incompleteness of alpha taxonomic data at which the present work is aimed. Therefore, the Quedius genus is accepted as a taxon, including 7 subgenera. Individual fauna of the genus are studied very unevenly, which is naturally explained by the historical and geographical reasons. The greatest number of publications is devoted to the fauna of the Western Palearctic, but only the fauna of Central Europe and some groups of the Mediterranean species have been fully revised up to now. The rest of the many publications by different authors are based on fragmented material and remain scattered. Unfortunately, such work include the 1970 fundamental work by Henry Coiffer, again reach China, which, however, is premature to be called exhaustive, as a large number of species are obviously not yet described. Finally, there's a fauna of North America. It's been quite well analyzed, as a number of species much fewer. And finally, there are regions for which there are no generalizing works at all. If we look at the map, it's easy to see that such areas are Russia and Central Asia. The fauna has not became subject of this study. Thus, the purpose of this work is a comprehensive study of the fauna and systematics of the rigid-winged genus of Russia and Central Asia. In order to achieve this goal, the following task must be performed: discover of species composition of these regions on the basis of critical analysis and generalizations of literature, as well as clear taxonomic status of individual species based on standard additional collection material, compiling annotated catalogue of Russian species and taxonomic revision of fauna of Central Asia, compiling and supplementing modern data on distribution and biology of the species, critical analysis of traditionally used and new morphological diagnostic traits to investigate the peculiarities of the species variability. So we use numerous literary data and collection materials from Russia and foreign organizations, private collections and personal collections. All are shown in this slide. In the course of this study, we used many entomological methods which can be found in the text of the dissertation, but one thing I would like to focus on specifically. As it is known, systematization and storage of information received in the course of processing of large amounts of literary and collection data is rather a difficult, challenging task. In the present work, for this purpose, the database created as Microsoft Access allowed us to make tables of any complexity, and moreover to create any connections between them. The use of this database has really simplified our work with the information received in the course of our research. Now let's proceed to the results. As we processed about 100 publications of 2,000 species in Central Asia, we identified there are 34 species, 3 of which have been described for the first time, and 14 has been excluded. As a result of processing about 250 publications and 4,000 exhibits, we identified 88 species, 3 of which have been described for the first time, and 6 have been excluded as erroneously. So we have also clarified information about distribution to describe distribution of the species in Russia in catalog summary, fractional division, mostly political administrative, which you can see in this slide. In accordance with applied zoning and analysis of quantitative distribution of the species, Russian regions was carried out. It was found that so we found some interesting peculiarities. For example, the fauna of the western and southern regions is better and have been studied more than that of northern eastern regions, which is natural based on available collection materials, as well as literary data, according to which some regions, especially in Siberia and in the Far East, have been studied very poorly, and in fact this fauna is much richer than we know today. The catalogue and identification tables compiled in this work are precisely the tool for studying biodiversity of these regions. In the course of our work, we've processed a significant number of generic materials, processing of which, along with available collection materials, resulted in the faunal taxonomic changes. 8 generic names have been were synonymous, most of it described earlier, on the basis of fragmented and scarce material, or 7 species were redescribed because descriptions were extremely outdated, or because they were very inaccurate, and for 7 species we designated lectotypes. In case of heterogeneous series or synthesis, in case of confusion in the understanding of species. We have also described 2 new species as a result of a critical analysis of the traditional and new morphological diagnostic features. We compiled tables for Russia and Central Asia with illustrations of habitus and edifices. As mentioned above, many of the problems we encountered due to the difficulty of distinguishing between different close species. In Quedius species, polymorphisms most often manifested in the features of the edifice structure, the apical part of the median lobe, and traditionally the solution to this problem is in the study of a representative sample of specimen from different parts of the range. If the variability is continuous and at the same time the extreme forms of variability do not correlate to the geography and occur in any part of the range or even within a single sample, we believe that we deal with interspecific variability, as was shown for species Q novus, shown in this slide. But in case there are differences and geographical pattern can be traced, we may talk about interspecific variability, as for example for the group of species Quedius mutilatus as revised in this study. However, the traditional methods of studying variability did not provide a clear answer on the status of the observed forms. Quedius umbrinus is a good example of that. Individual morphs have been described as separate species and later synonymized with proper justification. So we decided to study using the integrative taxonomy, which include simultaneous use of classical morphological, morphometric and molecular methods. In total, we used a sample of 140 exhibits with mitochondrial gene and nuclear winglets as molecular markers. The marked yellow specimen on the map were suitable for both morphological and molecular analysis, while the blue specimens were suitable only for morphological analysis. The phylogenetic reconstruction based on molecular data obtained by the method showed clustering of individual populations. Let me focus on some important points. Many exhibits originating from nearby areas formed separate clades for which the general structure was also characteristic. However, some geographically close species were different, such as exhibits from the Kaluga region found in different clades at the same time. They have different edifice structure and different of their clades. Interesting, West Caucasian exhibits, while exhibits collected in West Caucasus from the separate clade So where are the individual species? What is the variability? To answer this question, we compared sequences using a pairwise distance method, which showed a level of difference of up to 7% between some of the obtained, which on the examples of well-studied specimen is taken as a level of interspecific differences. The morphometric analysis based on the standardized photographs of the showed clustering of almost same groups as the molecular analysis. So this is preliminary data, and in the future, when we get more data, we may obtain more accurate results. But even according to the species Quedius novus, today is a group of species that needs to be revised, and yet even these preliminary results proved that these methods proved applicability of these methods for studying the species and can be successfully used in the future. And in conclusion, I'd like to summarize my conclusions. Fauna Quedius in Russian Central Asia consists of 104 species belonging to 5 subgenera. 2 new species have been described, 10 species have been re-described, and 8 species have been synonymous and designated for 7 species. The definition tables have been complied. Variability limits have been investigated for a number of Quedius species, in particular for species of Mutilla. This is for the first time a taxonomy summary of Quedius Central Asia and the original annotated list of species of this genus of Russia have been prepared. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Now, time has come to ask questions. Before asking questions, please introduce yourself. Does anyone have questions to the applicant? Kaufer was a professional entomologist or an amateur? Kaufer, was he a professional entomologist or an amateur? That's a difficult question. He was professional. He was a professional entomologist. But the difficulty is that in describing species, he didn't have sufficient material. And he did not take into account variability. And so it happens sometimes that he described one species as separate. But, he was a professional and he worked at specialized institutions, right? Thank you. Have more questions? Do we have more questions? Hold on a second, please. Please use the microphone. The title of your thesis contains the word ecology, and about ecology, there was no reference to ecology was made at all. This is a very popular question. Members of the council have also asked me this question, and I shall answer this question in the future, but I will also answer it now. Quedius is this group is very diverse, and some members require very specific research, and that is why we need much more time to describe this species. But the issue with Quedius is that it has never been generalized. No one collected information, gathered information from literature, and the word ecology I use the word in the sense of generalization. Yet, because there are no other works which describe Quedius species and distribution, so our work is the first one of this type, and that is why. So maybe you should have said so in the title. That's a philosophical question. So maybe you are right. Yes, maybe the title should have been different. More questions, please. Since we have no more questions, I want some clarification. Biology of these species so heterogenic that results cannot be presented is a summary. Yes. It's the species too diverse. So you compiled some kind of reference, but no generalization can be derived from your work. Yes, that's correct. Thank you. If no one has any further questions, so let's proceed to the next item of our procedure, is reviews. So external reviews. We don't have any. We have not received any external reviews, which is okay. So I'm going to give the floor to the members of the Dissertation Council, and so I'm giving the floor to Andrei Igorovich Granovich. Thank you very much. I'll try to make my review short. This dissertation is devoted to the process of taxonomy of numerous species of the broad genus Staphylinidae, which is so we understand. So the work is still in progress, and that will be determined by the future work of the author. So more than 100 species that are known to us. This is a result of the work. Because all the effort of the author is aimed at description of species in the two territories, vast territories mentioned, Russia and Central Asia. And so this is a result, some kind of a result, and to achieve this result the author had to deal with many challenges. So these challenges are very typical. For dealing with a vast species which has not been well described, as a diversity of description, inaccurate depiction of galotypes, absence of indications of collection sites of the available collection material, absence of representative series by which it's possible to determine the boundaries. So is hiatus is available or not, and the variability in the beginning, we could also say very little in the beginning. There's no material at all for some areas, differences in descriptions by different authors, and since everyone present here is an expert on taxonomy, I think everybody is very well familiar with these challenges. The work is based on an impressive set of collections of various scientific, educational and private collections, material of which has been analyzed by the author, and in addition personal collections from various regions of Russia. Methodologically, the work is done largely by the traditional methods, such as making preparations and illustrations. And when studying the variability of the species, morphometric and molecular by two markers approach has been used. The significant assistance in systematizing use of electronic database compiled by the author. The work includes 4 main chapters, where the author describes the main results. The first chapter briefly describes the work on systematization of collection data and the results of revision of the literary sources. Here is done a large amount of work. So the necessary stage of the study showed heterogeneity, often difficulty to compare fragmented data. In the second chapter, the author tries to characterize the phonic complexities of the species of Russia and Central Asia. The result of this work is the first annotated catalogue of the species and a taxonomic revision of the species list of Central Asia. Here, in the second chapter, so here we already had this ecological component of this study. There's some mention of ecology is actually made of, but in my review I've also say that there's not enough information on ecology, which does not agree with the title of the thesis. And so maybe that can become the subject of the future research. So it's very fragmented. There's very little information about ecology. In the third chapter, the author summarizes the results of her taxonomic activity and roadmaps of future work. And finally, the fourth chapter gives some examples of variability of species and application of molecular markers and multidimensional scaling in the analysis of morphometric data. And in conclusion, there's a brief conclusion. There's a revision of the results presented in previous chapters. In general, it's necessary to conclude the purpose that there is a complex study of the fauna and systematics of the Quedius has been achieved. The author shows herself proves to be a competent researcher, possessing the necessary methodological arsenal. And, well, there are all the prerequisites for the formation of a larger task, qualification work of the next level, related to the full-scale taxonomic revision of the genus. What I did not like, so the author can focus on those points in the future. I didn't like the section conclusion. So our theses are very short. So you expect each section to be informative, to communicate some new information. And conclusion is a very important section, which summarizes the ideas of the author. But in this section, I saw only some repetition of some results and enumeration of simple enumeration of activities of the author. I think that was a bit wasteful. So it will be interesting to hear the opinion of the author. Secondly, what I didn't like is we always wait for conclusion, and so here the thesis contains no conclusions. It contains some provisions set forth for defense, but these provisions are above conclusions. These are like concepts derived from conclusions. So when we look at these provisions, they are in reality they are conclusions, but items 1, 4, and 6. These are not conclusions. It's simply an enumeration of what the author has done in the course of her work. As it is obvious, in my opinion, maybe other members of the council have different opinions. I think this that's a drawback, a fault of material representation, and does not affect qualification of the author. And despite these comments, I would like to say that in general the thesis is an original piece of research, proves professional level. The results have been published in well-known journals, and thus the thesis by Salnitska Maria Alekseevna on the theme Quedius of Russian Central Asia completely corresponds to the requirements established by the order, or in the order of scientific degrees in the university, and the applicant deserves to be awarded a degree of candidate of biological sciences, specialty 030204, zoology. And clause 11 of the procedure has not been violated by the applicant, in my opinion. Thank you. Thank you. Now, according to our plan, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Katayev. The taxonomic study of systematics is the accurate differentiation of species without understanding of their taxonomic position. No research is possible, or at least incomplete. Therefore, the thesis by Maria Alekseevna Salnitska devoted to the taxonomic diversity of Quedius in Russia and Central Asia is undoubtedly important and actual and relevant, because the degree of study of these extremely extensive and of genus, including 700 species, remains insufficient. As for Russia and Central Asia, no targeted studies of the genus have ever been carried out in this area. However, the thesis is not presented in the new form we are not used to. It's a report of work, absence of a general methodologic outline, only the diagnosis is given, and characteristics of subgenera, complete absence of any analysis of the general geographical distribution and other generalizations at the level of genera, make it more difficult to perceive and evaluate the work as a whole completed work. Such approach facilitates the process of writing the thesis itself, but implies a good base in the form of published generalizing articles, which makes the dissertation to be less difficult. By its structure, the thesis consists of an introduction, 4 chapters, a conclusion, and a list of literature, including 116 works, mainly in foreign languages. It should be noted that out of 33 pages of the actual text of the thesis, 12 pages occupy extensive introduction, which discusses in great detail the degree of study of the issue and relevance of the topic of research, as well as the formulated purpose of the work, its scientific novelty, practical and scientific importance. In addition, provisions to be defended, data on testing of the results, and a brief description of the material studied and methods of research. It's indicated that on the topic of the published articles, 4 articles, total 170 pages, databases, corpus and weapon size, all in collaboration with one of the 2 academic advisors. However, the researcher always acts as the first author. The chapters of the thesis are fairly small, 3-5 pages, including illustrations, and in some cases repeat the actual information and provisions already presented in the introduction, which may be inevitable with the structure of the thesis, although with more thorough work it could be easily eliminated. The main efforts of the dissertation were aimed, first of all, at revealing the composition of the species in the territory of Russia and Central Asia, the basis of critical analysis and generalization of the literary data, as well as on study of the available collection material. So she has also reviewed 2 groups and data on distribution of many species. Considerable emphasis is only placed on studying the nature and types of variability, which resulted in a critical analysis of the traditionally used and new morphological diagnostic traits to identify the most reliable among them, with a view of creating an illustrated identification table based on them. Conducting research according to a well thought out and well founded plan with a large future focus is undoubtedly a positive aspect of the thesis. It's expected that these studies will continue both in terms of a more detailed study of the individual cases and in terms of the forthcoming general phylogenetic revision of the Quedius genus. The large extensive material studied, including more than 7,000 including typical 25 species, more than 2,000 preparations of genitals, about 500 drawings and photos, and most importantly, the correct use of a wide set of traditional and more modern methods of research, including the molecular methods, leave us with no doubt in reliability of received results and testify to high qualification of the thesis. Turning to the content of the chapter, should be noted that unlike the introduction, is not always written correctly. There are numerous stylistic errors and inaccuracies which are not simply as successful and clear expressions, but the meaning which can only guess, especially many of them in the 4th chapter. For example, on page 28, we read that the forms of the structure of the oedicus are sometimes taken for different kinds, and this also says observed polymorphisms make it difficult to differentiate species. And the chapter 4 itself, variability and boundaries of the species, should be called variability and delimitation of the species. Otherwise, it's not clear what boundaries are meant. Often, direct English terms are used, which, in my opinion, is not good. For example, Quedius mutilatus group of species, rather than Quedius mutilatus group of. Many such examples can be given. All of these makes reading more difficult and spoils the overall impression of the work. The order of the chapters also seems to be disputable. It would be more logical to start with a general description of the genus, consideration of the existing taxonomic issues and how they will be solved in the course of this work, and finish with a fauna review, because a faunistic study, although can go in the parallel, is always based on the results of the contract taxonomic analysis. Despite these remarks, the work shows that Maria Alekseevna has successfully coped with all the tasks set. The fauna of Russian Central Asia is identified as belonging to 188 species, were identified for Russia and 28 for Central Asia. 3 species of each of these regions have been described for the first time. Most of the studied species, the distribution has been clarified. 2 species have been described first. For 7 species, interpretation in literature, detailed redescriptions are made on the basis of standard and additional materials. New names are being grouped as synonyms. On page 11, it for some reason says 9. On the basis of carefully performed comparative analysis, the whole set of features used in the diagnosis was assessed, among which the most reliable ones have been identified on the basis of illustrated definition tables of species of Russia and Central Asia, which are undoubtedly the most valuable and part of the thesis. Besides, for the first time, a complete taxonomic revision of Central Asian species with a large number of high-quality photos, drawings and maps was carried out. Of particular interest are the results of studies of several species groups, such as interspecific variability using both traditional methodological and molecular data. Unfortunately, though the results of the complex study of variability are in themselves curious, the conclusions are not sufficiently explained, since the reader has to understand for himself on the basis of the illustrations given for which specific clusters similarities been identified. The same observation applies in connection with the absence of a complete comparative analysis of data on the distribution of Quedius species in Russia, presented in the published article only in species essays, in the form of essays, in the form of general maps and tables with photo administrative geographical regions. In spite of the fragmented nature of these data and significant gaps have been preliminary comparative analysis and specific faunas could be made, at least on the basis of more investigated regions. Without analysis and generalizations, there's no science. And I would also like to ask the applicant, what does she mean when it says that faunas of certain regions of Russia are characterized by considerable potential diversity? To sum it up, it should be said that Maria Alekseevna has done a very large amount of work, which is based on extensive material using the modern methods and contains a lot of new data. The noted comments are undoubtedly taken into account in her future further research. The thesis by Salnitska Maria Alekseevna on the theme Quedius of Russia and Central Asia taxonomy meets the basic requirements established by the order of the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1, on the order of awarding the academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the applicant, Maria Salnitska, deserves to be awarded the degree of Candidate of Biological Sciences, specialization 03, 02, 04 zoology. Clause 11 of the order has not been violated by the applicant, in my opinion. Thank you. Thank you, Boris Mikhailovich, for your feedback. Now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Yes.
Hello. I'll provide a summary of my review here. So Quedius is one of the most specious taxa of staphylinidae, and it has a very high degree of endemicity and habitat specialization, and it's one of the sort of most interesting and most problematic taxa among Rove-beetles. There are about 700 species of Rove-beetles, and 700 species of Quedius, and it's almost impossible to create keys for that key. There are parts of the world that are completely unexplored regarding the phonetic of the genus, complicating issues both with the alpha taxonomy and by geography. So the way I see it, the premise of this PhD dissertation was to tackle this called Quedius and assess the taxonomy phonistics of Russia and Middle Asia. I'll start by saying that dealing with Quedius is probably one of the most challenging problems in Rove-beetle systematics. Someone starts their career with this genus can tackle pretty much any future problem in Rove-beetle systematics. Russia and Middle Asia are particularly unexplored areas regarding the systematics of Rove-beetles, so the combination of geography and the taxonomic problems makes this dissertation a very highly relevant topic. So, a couple of comments here. I think the dissertation starts by using appropriate previously published works as the foundation of the research and expands by moving forward into the new research done. The research conducted here used modern techniques to address long-standing problems, and the conclusions I thought were appropriate and well thought out. I should add that I consider the published works by the candidate to be part of the dissertation, and I think the thesis itself should be evaluated along with the published papers that were very, very well written out. The introduction starts with a general overview of Quedius, what is known about the genus, the diagnostic characters, the presence of Quedius in various parts of the world, and finally, what is known about Quedius in Russia and Middle Asia. The scientific problem is discussed, as well as the purpose of the dissertation and its scientific novelty. And I think for the introduction, even though it was a little bit long, it was very well written and appropriate. Chapter 1 presents a summary of the background work to synthesize all available publications for Quedius in Russia and Middle Asia in the forms of annotated catalog. And this work was published as a 100-page paper in Zookis. I thought that that work by itself is probably the equivalent of a master thesis, and it was very, very well done. Chapter 2 presents the results of the phonistic analysis of Quedius for Russia and Middle Asia, and chapter 3 is the summary of the taxonomic work that resulted from the dissertation, description of new species, the description of 7 and 8 species that were synonymized. Chapters 2 and 3 resulted together in 3 papers published in international journals. Chapter 4 presents the results of the studying the interspecific variability for several species of Quedius using both traditional and modern DNA barcoding and morphometric techniques. I think the analysis presented here was state-of-the-art approaches for species delimitations, and they are very important for particularly challenging taxa. As far as areas of improvement, I think chapter 4 needed a little bit more discussion. A few details were given for the morphometric analysis presented here or the barcoding analysis. And we have liked to see a little bit more discussion on these results. But overall, I think the thesis was very well done. I thought the dissertation was significant scientific work. I think it was independent research. And I think it presented a lot of new data and taxonomic information that are going to be of very wide use to the scientific community. So that's my thoughts on this.
For your review. And,
Спасибо за ваш отзыв.
Я хочу предоставить слово Борису Александровичу Каратяеву для оглашения отзыва. Пожалуйста, прошу вас.
Я постараюсь как можно меньше повторять того, что уже подробно и очень аккуратно объяснено.
What was said what was already mentioned by the previous speakers, members of the council, and relevance of the thesis is obvious, and I also believe that the word ecology, in my opinion, is not well justified. I also think that the main task of the thesis has not been clearly stated. Quedius, not fauna, has been identified, and a comprehensive study of the species, yet the main task is identification of Quedius species in the above-mentioned territories, while fauna studies nature. And the tasks set by the author solved in a laboratory, and is insufficient identification of the composition of the species. That is why I cannot accept how the first task, the first objective has been defined, not in Russia and Central Asia. Central Asia it's been generalized in the first chapter. Maria Alekseevna never visited Central Asia at all, the basis of collection material. And in the text it says the fauna of Russia and Central Asia has not been a same mistake in the occurs when assessing biology. The thesis only contains generalization of earlier published data, and unfortunately I could not understand, I'm not sure, but clause 11, chapter on biology makes no reference to the works on the basis of which this chapter has been written. So I think this chapter violates clause 11 of the order of awarding academic degrees. But in my comment, there's no reference, and in publications, in the articles, the author actually makes reference to materials she used. That is why this comment of mine is no longer valid. provisions set forth for descent describe the results well, and recommendations on how to use the results are quite well explained. Reliability causes no doubts because the author worked under supervision of a distinguished expert on Quedius species, and how many exhibits have been collected and assembled by the applicant herself, because the applicant visited 8 regions herself. And novelty, she's summarized data about fauna of one of the largest staphylinide species in Russia, and provides a valuable and efficient instrument which can be used not only in these regions but in other countries. Unfortunately, the text is full of inaccuracies and mistakes, starting with the table of contents. And because this work is on taxonomy, and lexical mistakes are very lexical accuracy is very important, and misprints in the names of taxons are very undesirable. 4 publications make a significant contribution to the study of Quedius species in Russia and Central Asia, published in English, and so the publications look really good. They contain the main results of Maria Alekseevna's research. The thesis contains a description, and sometimes too simple description, naive description of challenges. Section 4, which has already been criticized by the other members, and there contains no new results, and just states that the group has not been established well. Would be the zoning system of Russia is quite good, but this zoning scheme is not for geographic description, but for making catalogs, which takes more time of entomologists and cannot be considered a scientific result. At the same time, Maria Alekseevna is an experienced collectologist, is well familiar with other group of winged insects, is a qualified and conscientious worker, has mastered classical and molecular genetic methods of taxonomic, and I believe that the drawbacks of your thesis are connected with common disproportions in defining aim, the goal and objectives defined by the author, and scientific publications, and the main result and the thesis of Maria Alekseevna Salnitskaya meets the main requirements set forth by the order on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the applicant, Salnitska Maria Alekseevna, deserves to be awarded the academic degree of Doctor of Biological Sciences, Specialty 030204. Clause 11 of the above-mentioned order has been violated only formally, and cannot affect the overall assessment of the thesis. Thank you, Boris Alexandrovich, for your feedback. Now, let me say some words about the thesis. Well, we have already heard the overall assessment of the thesis, so I will not repeat what was already said by my colleagues. I will only focus on sections which have not been. I would like to say that I was very favorably impressed by the thesis. I think the thesis should be assessed together with the articles which are the basis of the thesis. So the 4 articles, which are very good articles, they contain the main results and the main achievements of the applicant. The thesis itself, I think, I was mostly impressed by chapter 4, which contains not only results of private research of genus taxonomy, but also descriptions of approaches to species diagnosis and identification of species boundaries based on comprehensive analysis of both morphological and molecular features. These approaches include such important aspects as checking the congruence of morphological and molecular data and the set of features fall in the same clusters as methods of morphometry, which allow us to formalize the results of morphological research and make it more accessible for subsequent verification by the other researchers. Also, in my opinion, not enough attention is paid to the molecular component of the work, which is very significant. And here, a significant achievement of the author lies not only in achieving specific results, which allow us to say that such and such species is not so much in the sphere of taxonomy, but in the sphere of approaches which enable us to develop a methodology and approaches to research. So here the author has achieved some significant results, and I believe this section is very important and valuable. And that is why my main comment also is on this section. I would like to say that, speaking of setting the limits, the boundaries of species boundaries, the applicant forgot to discuss such an important issue of sympathy or paripatry, which is vital for understanding of the status of forms studied by the applicant. And in addition to that, is not clear. So all these topologists feel the genetic signal responsible for the appearance of typology. So that is important because mitochondrial genes sometimes have much more value. But these comments are quite specific and do not affect the overall positive impression made by the thesis. And I would also like to focus on complying with Article 11 of the above-mentioned order, which, and I would like to repeat myself because one of the Dr. Karatayev made some criticism here, and I took a very close look at the works published by the author, and I came to a conclusion there's no violation here, and all the articles contain full reference to the sources used by the author, and as the section is based on an article published in Zayakis magazine. It's based on a significant amount of literary data. It says that it's based on literary data, and then there is a reference made to the article. So I see no violation of Clause 11 of the order. So I think this it's okay. The thesis is okay for that. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that the thesis by Maria Alekseevna Salnitska corresponds to all the requirements established by the order and awarding the academic degrees in Petersburg University, and the applicant deserves to be awarded the degree of candidate of biological sciences, specialty in zoology. So this is my opinion. And now, according to our procedure, the applicant has the opportunity and has to answer comments and criticism from the members. So please, first of all, I would like to thank all the members of the Dissertation Council for careful and helpful feedback and critical remarks, which will help me in my future research and which I will certainly take into account. So now I would like to answer specific questions in the same order. So the first, my first comment is to Andrei Grishkar. Thank you for your insightful feedback. So let me answer your comments. Andrei Grich noted that the conclusions are more reminiscent of enumerating the work done in scientific conclusions. Unfortunately, in my phonistic taxonomic dissertation, which is largely aimed to summarize and systemize available data, so we create a basis for further analytical research which will lead to scientific conclusions in the common sense. Writing the traditional conclusions seemed difficult because at this stage we can only honestly list the elements of the work done. However, I agree that in some cases, such as in this section on the study of variability, an opinion may have been formulated differently. And speaking on provisions for defense, I agree with you, would certainly be appropriate to submit these provisions as theoretical thesis based on my material. Thank you for this observation. I will take this inaccuracy into account in the future. And I'm sorry I haven't done this earlier because of the procedure, and so I will take the most important criticism. Sorry, I didn't say this in the beginning. So next, I'll take Dr. Katayev review. Thank you for your detailed review. And as for the Boris Mikhailovich criticism regarding repetitions and bad expressions in chapter 4, indeed, with more thorough work with the text, we could have avoided repetitions and obscure definitions. I will take this into account when writing future papers. The order of chapters is described in accordance with the degree of detail from characteristics of the process information on fauna as a whole through the information on individual species to the statement of the complexity of species. The order was chosen by us as the most expedient way to write this thesis. However, your proposal is also quite valid and will be considered by me in the future. I apologize for the error on page 11. The generic names reduced to synonyms are really 8. With regard to the observation that that the conclusion of chapter 4.2 is not sufficiently explained, I would like to say the following. The chapter mostly contains appropriate methodology which can be applied to the study of variability. With regard to clades, although they are not listed in the text, they are clearly shown in diagrams on which the data can be compared. But of course, I share your opinion that in order to fully understand this chapter, you need more information. And in my future publications, of course, all your comments will be taken into account and all the details will be provided. With regard to the comment that lists a preliminary comparative analysis of habitats and specific faunas could be made, at least on the basis of the more fully studied regions, the answer to this question was given above by Boris Alexandrovich. And answering the question, what does the applicant mean when she says that the faunas of certain regions are characterized by considerable potential diversity? The answer, I would like to answer the following. I mean that some regions have been studied so poorly that only single species are known, but their biogeographical nature, the area and the degree of study of the neighboring areas indicate that these areas are inhabited by a much larger number of species that are currently known. This is also confirmed by the specific facts, such as new species recently described by our colleagues from the Far East, Altai, and other insufficiently studied regions. Thank you again, Boris Mikhailovich, for your feedback. I'll take the next review by Dr. Hadzimanolis. Thank you for your insightful feedback and for your questions. First of all, why Quedius umbrinus is a good model for research. As I already mentioned, Quedius umbrinus is widely known as a very variable species. Our data prove that this opinion is incorrect, and no one has studied them seriously. And demonstrated traditional systematics cannot provide reliable information. And our modal range prove that our is different from the our model has shown that the complex alpha differs from the conventional, but the model shows that it probably weather blind the same approach as other species. And chapter 4 should contain more detail. I agree with you. Many members of the council have also expressed these comments, and I regret that the decision was made to make it so short. And in my future publications, I will go into much more detail. And once again, Dr. Hadzimanolis, thank you for your feedback. And I will now take comments by Boris Alexandrovich Korotyaev. I'd like to thank Boris Alexandrovich for his detailed feedback. And since he gave most critical comments, I will dwell on his comments in more detail. To answer the question about the unjustified inclusion of the word ecology in the title, I'd like to say the following. I already answered this question. I'd like to say that, as you said, in the study of ecology, in the course of a candidate study is not as impossible. Understanding the biology of individual species. In the case of Quedius, for the region studied in the thesis, there's no generalizing work, and actual information had to be searched by heterogeneous, not always reliable publications. In our thesis, this information has been critically processed and summarized. Therefore, the inclusion of the word ecology in the title of the thesis in this context seems quite justified to me. As for the 2.3, this brief section is not borrowed. That is why it implies citation. Certainly some information in this section, for example, the statement that Quedius abdominalis lives only in the burrows of Prometheus vole, and similar remarks. It's not given in the section for the first time, but was published earlier. However, this, as well as many other separate facts from which generalized notions about their biology and ecology are formed, used in section 2.3 of the thesis, have already been summarized by me with citation of all the numerous original references in my published works, co-authored with Alexey Solodovnikov. Those works have been given on other pages of my thesis, summarize the previously published information on species, including biology and ecology, with all the necessary references. And to a large extent, and also directly cite all, even the most unknown works. I did this database, chapter 1 of my thesis. In this chapter of my thesis, many references, original work given, they show primary data on biology, reason section 3 are borrowed. Taken into account the generalizing works of the author, in which all the references, including the works where details of biology, abdominalis, and others are mentioned for the first time, and their repeated generalized citations in the thesis, are also the fact that section 2.3 was conceived as a very brief, more detailed citation of the original literature in this section of the thesis, did not seem reasonable to me. Regarding the absence of sections analyzing the geographical distribution of fauna and the ecological groups of the genus Quedius, I would like to answer the following. Undoubtedly, such sections are important for a full understanding of the distribution of species of the individual groups, but provided that there is a reliable and preferably exhaustive information about the species. In the situation with the Quedius genus for faunas of Russia and Central Asia, such generalizations for many species are unfortunately premature at present, as additional species studies are needed for this purpose. I personally collected about 1,000 exhibits of Quedius. About 100 were assembled. The rest of the preparations also assembled by me personally, except for the first few dozens, which were made by my advisor for the educational purposes. No description of objects and naive description of the challenges. I'd like to say that the thesis contains little sufficient information is provided in my other publications, which does not apply to description of the problems and difficulties. And to make it complicate the work with the object, it has undeniably successfully chosen methodology. The success of the task's progress in the study of Quedius is also often impeded by the absence of a well-developed methodology for studying the object. But the search and development of the new effective methodology, as we know, is not always an easy task. And everybody knows that the absence of a result is also a result. However, the present thesis in section 4.2, such technique is found and the efficiency of its application for other problems is shown. Comment that the annotated catalog cannot be considered scientific results can rightfully relate to well-researched groups of insects. However, in cases where for the fauna of such a vast territory of Russia there are no generalizing works of the catalog at all, especially in combination with the defining table, it's a reasonable, inevitable measure without which further fruitful research of the group is practically impossible. And as for the comment on imbalance in the definition of goals and tasks to be solved in the thesis, is rather a question for my advisors. But of course the choice of topic was my conscious decision, despite the possible difficulties and problems perceived in advance, and I still wanted to write this thesis. I also would like to say the following. First of all, as is known in modern scientific world, the leading position is occupied by the teams of scientists, where everyone brings something new, contributes something new. Therefore, the presence of two academic advisors is rather an advantage than a drawback. And secondly, the family, because heterogeneous problems at different levels, is not the best group for writing a uniform and consistent PhD thesis. And by avoiding such topics, however, takes the scientific community further away from the progress and greater revisions of large and complex group and solving some of the problems of entomology in general. So I want to ask the rhetorical question: who else but not us? And I would like to thank Boris Alexandrovich for commenting on the misprints, grammar and lexical errors. It's undoubtedly necessary to subtract the text for this take more closely, and I will take this into account in my writing future publications. And thank you for your comments about the stylistic inaccuracies. In the future, I will try to avoid those and be more conscientious approach to the style. And thank you again for your comments. And finally, a final review by Dr. Luktanov. Thank you also for your feedback. And Vladimir Alexandrovich noted that we didn't use the fact of partial sympathy of A and B clades in parapathies of A and C clades. Probably kind of between the Cox's martin as the main evidence of the presence of two species. Here, Vladimir Alexandrovich, you are right. We should have used this evidence as the main proof of the presence of several species in the group. I thank you for your this profession. However, it doesn't contradict the main postulate results of the chapter and will be used as evidence in my future publications. Thank you for commenting on the lack of clarification about the sequence of comparisons in Figure 12. as you suggested. Thank you for the question about the correspondence topologies and the gene. If discuss how they obtained using genes was undoubtedly less informative. Obtained using was less informative in solving the terminal clades, which were not discouraged. However, the use of the wingless gene in the study is justified as an alternative gene to support the assumptions of the thesis. And again, thank you for your feedback. So these are all the answers. Okay, now anyone present here has the opportunity to speak, express their opinions. So we have open discussion. So please feel free to speak. But please introduce yourself. Vladimir Nisyonov, Department of Entomology, Assistant Professor, Head of Department. It's very hard to hear in this room. This is hard to hear what's been said by the council members, by the applicant. So the attendees were not able to hear very well. So maybe I missed something. But I would like to say there are different works. There are some studies deal with absolute novelty, specific groups first identified, first facts first discovered, and these are described in much detail. And on the other hand, there are works aimed at clarifying research done by the others, make it more systematic. So different approaches used by different researchers, and the thesis by Maria Alekseevna belongs to the second category. The title calls for a critical approach. I think is much wider than a provision generally put forth for defense. And there are some things, some approaches which could be used, but for some reason were not used. So the question, if there's no geography, the geographical component is certainly missing from this thesis. There's no comparative analysis, and in general the approach is so the author mostly worked with material which was available. So Maria Alekseevna collected the material herself, but mostly she collected material not in the regions she's trying to describe. And yet I think setting such a task is very important, because in the future, over the time, lots of unreliable data and appears, and some objects are described in such different ways that it's hard to compare them. For example, because one researcher describes wings and the other researcher describes genitals, so it's hard to compare the two descriptions. Impossible to compare the two descriptions, which was this situation existed until the beginning of the 20th century, and so these three components, for example, genitals, wings, and DNA, describe an object in very different ways, because each researcher has his own favorite approach. For example, one researcher loves to use DNA. So these are different approaches, and it's very hard to compare these two approaches. So what Maria Alekseevna tried to do to look at this, take up this complex material in this very young fauna of European part of Russia and Central Asia. The fauna is very young in every respect. So this is a very valuable effort which creates a good basis for future research and future studies comparing different so these are same species. So do the species merge or they don't merge? So this is. So has anyone tried breeding these insects? So it's not. So this situation is true for many species of insects. So in the systematics work is kind of similar to that of a coin collector. So I welcome Maria Alekseevna and her work as a new era, new stage in the development of staphylinide systematics, which is a very challenging task. It's a very complex group with thousands of species which have not been described, and I think the applicant deserves the academic degree she has applied for. And unfortunately, before Maria Alekseevna answers the questions, does anyone else want to have any comments about the thesis? So I don't want to leave with the impression that I didn't like the thesis. My criticism was aimed at, with my criticism I wanted to say that every quality work is good, and it's very conscientious work. So what I wanted to say on the selection of the subject theme does not necessarily determine the result. But as for the significant contribution, so this is a very the thesis contains high quality tables and figures, but in my opinion, fauna should be studied outside, and a young collector is because collections become bigger, and selection of the topic. I understand, this depends on the group history and very confusing data. For a young girl who has just started studying the group, I don't think this selection of subject was very successful. I understand that the academic advisor maybe wanted the applicant, but I don't think that this approach should be used. There's another approach which is old and classical, but I think it is good. You invite a young scientist to fill in the gaps, the existing gaps, and then their study is performed at a relatively low level, but the researcher becomes more professional and then the researchers are responsible. So these are, I called these proportions, and of course I think the supervisors should pay more attention to the way the thesis has been written. The supervisors should pay more attention to mistakes and grammar and lexical errors. And so this you always pay attention to these issues when you submit an article to a journal, to a magazine. And so the Russian part and the articles written by the author, but articles in European journals, these have been edited. So this is so it's good to see how the applicant has mastered the skill of writing scientific papers and articles. So that's. So thank you, Boris Alexandrovich. So I think this comment should be addressed to the academic supervisor rather than to the applicant. I think the most responsibility is with the director of the institute. The institute is responsible for the results. The academic council, when it approves a topic, it counts on the academic supervisor. Of course, well, it's one cannot but agree with you, but there can be different approaches. But we are discussing a specific thesis. Does anyone else have questions or opinions about any feedback? Okay, now let's see. And I would like to give the floor to Maria Alekseevna. And I would like her to answer the comments. Because the comments were very general, and so that is why unfortunately I did not collect material in Central Asia, even though I wanted to do so. And here, so fauna should be done in the field. I should have collected more material, but to return to the answers given before. Fauna of Central Asia was not accessible at all, and so it was the first work which enabled where I made an attempt to do so, and I think this work will. And as for the other regions, the Caucasus can be not that did not obtain too much new data. Not as much new data as I expected, but thank you for your understanding, because I run into this problem as my theme is being criticized. Thank you, Boris Alexandrovich. I totally agree with your comments. Real fauna and real peculiarities of species can be only experienced during field work, and I realize that. And now, in having the definition keys, I will travel more and do many field trips. Thank you. Now I have to give the floor to the academic supervisors, who will be the Fyodor Vladimirovich Konstantinov. We'll give the floor to Fyodor Vladimirovich Konstantinov, who will tell us how the work was performed. Dear colleagues, because we have limited time, I will try to be brief. I would like to say that Maria Alekseevna took up Quedius when she became a student, a postdoctoral student, which was 4.5 years ago, and that was a very risky endeavor, because she worked with beetles, but different type of beetles, so she had very limited time to understand this group, its complexity from the point of taxonomy, and to make herself familiar with the group, main methodological methods, molecular methods, with which she was not familiar before, cyber methods, and since her first day, since she became a student, she started to work very hard, like 12 hours a day, and over a very brief period of time, she managed to obtain significant results and prepare them for publication, to produce 4 articles published very quickly. And this alone is good evidence that Maria Alekseevna is an accomplished researcher who can achieve her goals and deal with challenging tasks from point of taxonomy, geography, and any real researcher continues learning all his life, which is also so this Maria Alekseevna also has this capacity, and she always wants to move forward, and she is able to keep up the pace. And as her academic advisor, who watched Maria Alekseevna organized field trips. She was successful in obtaining additional resources, so she was able to arrange an internship in Canada, Copenhagen, other places. So I was able to look at a great number of separate exhibits. So all this became possible because of her persistence and great determination to work and to achieve her goals. And from that point, I would like to describe Maria Alekseevna in a very positive way. So that's it. And I would like to give the floor to my colleague Alekseevich Solodovnikov. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you, Fyodor, for your speech. I would like to add, I worked with Maria Alekseevna in the remote mode, quite similar to Dr. Hatzimanolis, and I, as a representative of an expert on the staphylinide specimen, I'm proud to say that I defended my own thesis at this university, and I had very similar, my experience was quite similar, but that was some time ago in a different room, and it's very important to study staphylinide. It's a very challenging and very interesting task in Russia and in Central Asia. So that's very important and very difficult. So these are two important issues, and in my opinion, I've always wanted somebody to start this work. Even collections Maria has processed, which is a significant contribution. And so these the collections are not such a good instrument today anymore. And so doing this work is this work is. And this can be a good project for a team of researchers. So when I first started to think, and when I first met Maria Alekseevna, I knew about these difficulties, and in fact we ran into more difficulties about zoning, more issues with zoning. But when I've spoken to Maria Alekseevna, I had the feeling that she's capable to do this work, and she's the right person for this project. And during that period, she's done a great job. She has not spent enough time on field trips, was molecular studies of Quedius in Western Europe, which was outside the scope of her work. So this was not, she didn't include this information in her thesis, but she spent some time to study staphylinide, the family. So she maybe, so she doesn't. She's not well familiar. She doesn't know the group in depth, but she has sufficient knowledge about this species, and this. I think we can see the evidence of that in your thesis, and I would like to, I would like to agree with Fyodor, and being the advisor of Maria Alekseevna, I also learned a lot, and so that was very valuable experience, and I thank everybody. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Alexey Yurovich. Now, time has come for our discussion. So discussion or is only for the council members. For that period of time, I would like to stop broadcasting, and I'm kindly asking the attendees who are not members of the dissertation council, please leave the room. And I will invite you to come back in about 5 minutes maximum. Dear colleagues, the meeting is resumed. Please turn the sound on and make sure we are on air. It seems to be working properly. And the most important moment of our meeting has come, and I now put the awarding of the academic degree to the open individual voting. Let me remind you that the decision of the Dissertation Council shall be considered positive if more than a half, but not less than 3 members of the Council vote for it. Taking part according to Article 23 of the procedure for awarding the academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And now I will ask all the council members for their opinions. My first question is to Andrei Igorevich Granovich. Your opinion? I am for awarding the degree. Thank you. Same question to Boris Mikhailovich Katayev. Your opinion? As I said already, I still have to say I am for awarding the degree. Same to Karatev Boris. I am also for awarding the degree to Maria Alekseevna. Same question to Dr. Hadzimanolis. What is your opinion?
I'm for awarding the degree.
Yeah. Thank you. And myself, chairman of the council, I also believe the thesis deserves the degree should be awarded to the applicant. So we can count the votes now, which is easier because 5 members voted for awarding the degree. So, dear colleagues, dear guests, out of 4 members of the council, 5 members voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained. So the decision to award the degree of candidate of biological sciences, specialty 030204 zoology, to Salnitska Alekseevna has been made. So there's no, instead of applause, we now give the floor for her. So do we have much time? So we still have some time left. So our session has to be no more than 2 hours. So first of all, I would like to thank all the members of the Dissertation Council for agreeing to take part in the meeting, for giving your time, your energy, for your valuable comments. Honestly speaking, for me it was an honor to present my thesis to a council of such composition. I would like to thank all my family, my friends. Unfortunately, not all of them are here, but they have always supported me. And first of all, I would like to thank my mother. Without her support, I wouldn't be able, and without her help, I would make much more mistakes. And also, I would like to thank my academic supervisors, Alexey Yuryevich, Fyodor Vladimirovich, Alexey Yuryevich for his professional Quedius skills, and Fyodor here and general entomologic and academic university skills. And I would like to thank you not only for your professional experience, but also for sharing your life experience with me, which was even more significant. Also, I would like to thank the Department of Entomology. When I became a master's student, I had to submit my motivational letter. I said in this letter that I believe this department of St. Petersburg University is the best classical school of classical entomology in Russia, and I still have this opinion. I still believe this is true. The entomology department, being a student, was challenging but always interesting, so thank you. I'd like to thank the department for being my home for a while. Also, I would like to thank the staff of the Zoological Institute of Collectorology Department for the great atmosphere, the great spirit I experienced each time I came to work with your collections. This was very valuable, and for the care, the personal attitude that you always have for the works, for the and I would like to thank all the attendees, all the guests. Thank you for coming and for visiting, for attending this session. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Now I think we can congratulate candidate of biological sciences with successful presentation of your thesis. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. At that, I declare the session closed. Thank you all for your participation. Please stop online broadcasting. Thank you.